So you're wanting to make a story with a large cast, but you're struggling to juggle all the characters and make them memorable. Here's a couple of tips I've learned about making major minor characters, main cast, main side cast, or just whatever you want to call it, more memorable and easier to write. Before we get into it, let me talk about what I'm drawing in the background. This is a poster for my webcomic Keys of Corruption, which hopefully is going to be coming out late spring, early summer of this year, 2025 that is. In a world where 1% of the population is born with a special power called keys, distressing things start to happen to Rose Kingsley when her mentor dies. This sets into motion a dangerous chain of events that will change Rose's life forever. So, if this sounds like your thing, consider following me on my socials. Links are in the description. It's very common to try and overcomplicate character motivations while writing, but keeping motivation simple is an easy way for people to connect with your characters. Do they want to find hidden treasure? Maybe they want to adventure across the world, find a family member, become the best in a specific field, or maybe they just want to have fun with their friends. A tip I've learned from some comic industry professionals, which applies mostly to, comics, is that your audience is lazy. While you shouldn't spoon feed your plot and complex themes to your audience, if it's too confusing to figure out what character motivations are, then they'll most likely switch off. So if you have a larger cast and all of them have complex motivations, then it's going to make your job super difficult. Motivations should be simple, but the journey shouldn't be. Each character you make should have a design unique to them. They may be wearing their favorite color, maybe they're a fashionista, or maybe they're just a hoodie and jeans kind of guy. Each choice you make will affect the way your audience perceives your character. Keeping your cast looking cohesive is important too. This only really applies to the side characters that will be around most of the time, but it's important that all of your characters look like they're from the same universe. Using an example, if we look at the Sins from the Hazbin Hotel Hell of a Boss universe, the designs are certainly unique, making sure that you're aware they're all about individuality. And this works, since a lot of them don't get along. But what if I told you they were supposed to be cohesive as well? Their designs are supposed to be based on a circus act, one that Lucifer is running. However, if you look at the designs again, only Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Mammon give off the vibes of a circus act. Let's look at another show that I feel does this right, One Piece. At a glance, especially their early designs, the main cast look like they're sailing the seas and part of the same group. Sanji is the only outlier to this design choice, but if you consider his character, he still fits in. I think One Piece, and maybe a lot of older shonen anime in general, nail the unique but cohesive designs. This tip feeds into personal preference a little bit, but splitting up your main cast when they're doing shenanigans. For example, say you have a large cast of about 7 characters. When they're going on an adventure, they get split up. 2 groups of 2, a group of 3. Inside those groups, you will be able to establish dynamics a lot easier than just in a group of 7. And then they'll come together for the climax of the arc. But the next time you split the cast up, switch up who's paired with who. This will place a greater emphasis on your character interactions and develop a natural dynamic between those characters. But also it might appeal to your audience because all of the characters would be interacting at some point. After spending a considerable amount of time in fandom spaces, the one thing I've noticed is that large groups of people get disappointed when 2 characters have never interacted in a long-running show. Sometimes it's impossible for every character to interact, but amongst your main cast, they should all interact at least once. This way of developing dynamics will make it easier on you, the writer. You don't have to worry about developing 7 dynamics instantly. Instead, you take it slow and do it over time. Plus, putting the dynamics directly into action will help you remember them better when it comes to writing them again. This is kind of a follow-on from the last tip, but intertwining character backstories means there's less weight on you when you're writing. Making character backstories is fun, until you have to make 20 in a row, which then becomes miserable and kind of exhausting when you have to try and make them all unique. Like, why am I trying to one-up myself in the angst department? Can't they all just be happy for once? The way I've learned to combat this, which also feeds into character interaction dynamics, is intertwining the backstories. It could be a simple event which 2 of your characters were at, but influenced them in 2 different ways. Maybe one of them is looking for a sibling, and another character was the last person to see them alive. Or maybe one character is trying to exact revenge on their lover's killer, and someone else in the cast is the child of that killer. If backstories are intertwined in a negative way, it instantly gives tension to scenes where there probably shouldn't be any, but it would also intrigue the audience. Or, if they're intertwined in a positive way, then it could be a nice callback for the 2 characters to have when they're reminiscing. This one's a bit more of a brutal tip, but if a character doesn't affect the overarching plot at all, cut them out. This goes specifically for the main cast. While it's nice to have a large cast so you can keep doing more things with them, make sure they are actually affecting the plot in some way. Maybe they have a piece of information vital for finding someone, or maybe their presence itself is a foil for another character. In some way, shape or form, a character needs to impact the wider plot, otherwise they'll basically be useless. Now, I'm not telling you to completely scrap a character. Maybe just remove them from the main cast. Make them a reoccurring side character that you see once or twice. Maybe they show up just to tell some jokes, keeping the essence of the character, or maybe you just reuse the character in another section. This falls under the kill your darlings advice that a lot of writers get about scenes, where if it doesn't add anything, take it out. I'm not really a follower of the kill your darlings advice, but I do follow measure twice, cut once. Basically, I imagine two different scenarios in my head, one with the character and one without. If nothing changes, or it changes slightly, I either change the character to make sure they affect the plot, or I save the character for some other time. For example, in my first draft of Keys of Corruption, I had this character named Blaze. She was shy and timid. I also have 4 other characters like this, so I cut her out, and I added a new character. I added in Minnalie, who is the complete opposite. She's mean, edgy, in love with her best friend, but Minnalie's affected the plot a lot more than Blaze ever did simply because I shifted the character around. Now Blaze isn't completely gone. I've saved her design for a completely different character. This is what I talk about when I say scrap a character. This is less of a tip and more of a consideration to have when writing, but there's a difference between adding side characters slowly or all at once. In other words, are they friends pre-story, or does the friendship develop as the story continues? Having a large cast of friends before the story starts means you have to introduce them all pretty much immediately, which can be a lot of work. However, if you consider tip 3, then you can streamline introducing your characters. Instead of introducing 6 characters individually, you can pair them all up together, and suddenly you only have to write 3 introductory scenes. In contrast to this, you can have your characters appear throughout the story to become friends with and give them their own allocated time to shine. Doing this multiple times will already bulk out your story if you're looking to do a long one, but you do have to consider that once the spotlight's off them, they'll still need to be present in the story, and there might be a large demand for certain characters to take over the spotlight. So there's pros and cons for both, which is why you have to consider what works best for you and what story you're trying to tell. It's very easy to get wrapped up in developing your side characters so that people will love them as much as you do. However, this tip is the most important one of them all. Never, ever forget who your main character is. Most of the attention of the story should be on them and driven by them. Side characters are sometimes most effective when they have little screen time compared to the main character. Take Echo from Arcane. He's got some of the least amount of screen time, but he has one of the most major effects on the plot. However, you still know he's a side character compared to Jinx and Vi. Hopefully you found these tips helpful in writing larger casts. Obviously, this isn't a checklist, and you can absolutely cherry pick from this or disregard it altogether. It took me a while to figure these things out, so I wanted to make this video to share my advice and what works for me personally. Happy writing!